Hi, Sultan.
Hey man, how are you? It's great to see you.
I'm doing great. Great to see you too. Thank you so much for joining me today on these. I think you're now the fourth OpenBB champion. We still have not announced the third one. And actually, no, fifth. We have two on the lay. So yeah, super excited to have you.
Well, thanks for having me. And it's easy to be a champion of you guys, but I will say it's your progress. The last 6 months in particular has just been absolutely fantastic. I am just so happy for you and the rest of the team. This is one of the coolest things going on in finance right now, and I'm just excited that it's out there and people can actually do it and download it and use it and go from zero to unbelievably productive in no time whatsoever.
Thank you. That means a lot. But I want to go more on that. But before we go there, tell me about yourself. Like, who are you? I mean, you are on Yahoo Finance on CNBC, you're always on TV doing something. Like who are you? How do you know? How was your journey? Where did you grow up? Like,
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking. I've got an interesting background because my one side of my family is Scottish, but or like came over on like the third ship after the Mayflower, so I'm like old school, blue blood, son of the American Revolution on one side. And then on the other side, my father was born in Tanzania and came over to the U.S. basically as a refugee when the socialists of the late 60s and 70s basically stole all our land on Tanzania. And so he had to go back to university. And so I was born when he was in graduate school, and he became one of the first genetic engineers. And so I grew up in an academic environment at the University of Illinois, where he was using computers in the 1970s to do statistics on molecular biology, which even at that time was new, to try to figure out how to manipulate gene sequences in plants to do things like have the plants create their own pesticides to increase yield and things like that. And so I grew up in the dawn of genetic engineering, and then got to live all over the world, and then was fortunate enough to win a National Science Foundation grant very early on. I was still a teenager, and it was to build a lip reading supercomputer. And so that's what got me into artificial intelligence in the spring of 1992 originally. And so I spent most of the 90s bouncing between fundamentally international security and artificial intelligence. And I got to a point where I'd wired together three of the fastest supercomputers in the world to try to get it to learn how to read lips using what we would now call a deep learning system, a backprop neural net. And I got to a point where it was, phonetically able to understand different sounds and, why, a T was different than a V and things like that. But it never really got quite to a point where you could turn it into anything beyond a research project. And so I ended up going to the markets. And that was really what got me into this notion of financial data and transaction processing and removing a lot of the friction from the financial ecosystem. And I was lucky enough to work on the, kind of the modernization of the New York Stock Exchange, opening up to internet-based trading, getting rid of the old mainframe systems, moving to modern protocols, moving to a place where, we could, in essence, have, high volume frequency traders, high volume transaction processing systems, and where we could work in a productive way with the regulatory community. So I spent a lot of time working with the SEC as well. And then 9/11 happened, and obviously we had to deal with all of that. But then from then onward, did a bunch of corporate stuff. But ever since then, I've basically done two things. I've either been a college professor, either in quantitative finance or computer science, mostly focused on either the next version of the internet or artificial intelligence or cybersecurity. And then done a series of startups. I did a cloud computing company. I did a biotech. I've done a fintech or two. I did a company that optimized pricing for PBMs. Didn't even get to an actual name or build a brand for that one. The first customer ended up buying it right out from underneath me, which was a lot of fun. And then a few years ago, I had the opportunity to go to the FDIC as their first chief innovation officer and run, in essence, a big transformation agenda as well as policy for crypto, AI, cyber, a bunch of other stuff like that. And then for the last 18 months, I've been building a financial, I guess you could call it a financial technology company. We're an artificial intelligence company. We're in the soft launch moment, I guess is what you could call it, for Frontier Foundry. But that's the journey for me.
and that's impressive. I like the one of the acquisition even before there was a company to acquire. That's a first. That's
Yeah,
really that's really interesting.
I always feel bad about that company because I don't think they realized that they were fundamentally buying an Excel spreadsheet, and I mean, it was great. It saved them, tens of millions of dollars a year, but I think they thought it was way more complicated than it actually was.
Oh my God, I love it. I love it. Yeah, I mean, such an interesting journey. It seems that like everything you've done has led you to this moment where you're actually like in such a good position. Like for instance, I'm thinking I was in New York like last week, and I went to this event called Rebellion AI, which is like the future of finance and generative AI. And like your background has led you into this space. So like I bet there's very few people that have such a a background that led us to this field, because you grew up with the AI and then you started getting associated with financial markets, and you've been at the intersection and the technology at the same time for a long time now. And so it's very interesting to see like how have you found the demand of your like services, of your knowledge, like 10-15 years ago, and now that everything is exploded with ChatGPT, do you see people like actively reaching out and asking for your comments on things, or how has that been?
Yeah. It's such a difference from the last 30 years. For most of the time that I've been in this sector, people who did finance, really hardcore finance, like capital markets, hedge funds, market systems, things like that, and tech, it was a very small crowd. Maybe a few tens of thousands of people around the world. It wasn't a big community. And you combine that with people who were doing artificial intelligence, and it was similar, like maybe 10, 20,000 people around the world. You put those two communities together, and there are about 500 people who always ended up at the same conferences. So there's this little cabal of us who just kind of bounced around for whatever. And I was on the younger side of that crew when I got into it. And so, a lot of those guys have gone off and retired, and I'm jealous. They're all sitting on the beaches or, teaching and not thinking too hard about anything. But yeah, it's been a really big change. OpenAI's marketing team has just done such an absolutely fantastic job of bringing so much of this to the forefront of today and building such a big splash. But you also have 30 years of bad decision making by a lot of companies. There's a lot of legacy technology out there. There's a lot of old technology, a lot of stovepipes out there. And so the opportunity to use technologies and to kind of change how we use them in terms of their value, in terms of how easy it is to get them moving, the tooling, it's a little bit of a perfect storm, I think, of a bunch of bad things that have kind of hit critical mass, a bunch of great new things that have hit critical mass, and a population that's willing to accept them, and not just willing to accept them. I think, one of the parts of our shared journey together over the last, year or so is we're being pulled into these conversations. We're not having to push ourselves into these conversations. I get media requests every week. I get people reaching out for consulting every week. I get people reaching out for my new company, which, we're a pretty quiet little company. We just launched the website a few weeks ago. I'm getting 3 or 4, reasonably high quality inbounds every week. And we don't have a sales force, and I don't intend to hire a sales force. And, we're about almost 2 years ahead of revenue of where I expected us to be. And that's a weird thing to say for a company that's as young as we are.
So I'm glad you actually touched on that, because that was my next question. Is like, okay, what are you doing now? What is your company, trying to solve? Like you have all of this knowledge inside of you. Like, where are you trying to go with your company? And tell the name of the company if you want.
Well, yeah, the company is called Frontier Foundry. And it's really, it's because what we're trying to do is take frontier technologies, and artificial intelligence is one of them, and put it into the foundry and turn it into something meaningful in a very short amount of time. And so, our thesis is that the moment we're in right now, the enabling technologies, the power of open source technologies like what OpenBB has done and others, will allow someone who knows what they're doing to go from 0 to 1, which historically might have taken 10 years and $100 million. You can do in 6 months with, I don't know, $10-20 million if you know what you're doing. And so that's what we're doing. We also have kind of 2 philosophical differences than so many of the other companies out there. So let me dig into that. Number one is the vast majority of companies out there in AI are governed by the availability of GPUs. We are not. We've invented a bunch of technology that allows us to avoid having to use GPUs and custom coding in order to get the performance out of commodity programming languages, C, C++, Python, etc. And so, I can run stuff 10,000 times faster than most people can on just CPUs. And that's a really cool piece of technology we've invented. The second thing is we don't believe in the kind of one big model or two or three multimodal big models to rule them all. Version 1 of generative AI, which is really what a lot of, Meta, Google, OpenAI have live in the market right now, is kind of this big one model view of the world. Unstructured learning, unsecured, big public infrastructure, a lot of shared data. And so what you get out of it is kind of a mash, right? It's just like everything. And so it's not surprising that we're talking about hallucinations and other issues like that, right? I think version 2 of generative AI is what's being built right now, which is basically slightly more structured learning, the ability to run multiple models, the ability to, in essence, have different models for different categories of questions or categories of activity you're trying to do. And I think in a lot of ways, what OpenBB right now is doing is actually pretty similar to that, right? It's more narrowly focused, but fundamentally still, a large model environment. My view is that there is a third version that's being built right now that is what I call ensemble AI. And what that means is you have many models, tens of them, if not hundreds of them. And the early versions of those are orchestrated manually. So a domain expert, me, you, someone like that, will kind of walk across a decision process you want to make, and you'll glue a couple of these models together. What's going to be very interesting later this year and into next year is when AIs start being built that actually do the orchestration for you. And then you can start using evolutionary biology as a way of modeling the evolution of artificial intelligence. And that's going to be the first time that's ever happened. And so I don't think, I certainly don't think we're going to build an AGI, not remotely. I think we're a decade or more away from something like that. But are we going to start seeing that in that kind of behavior, that kind of evolutionary move in AI, which will be a radical accelerant to the model learning process and the execution? Well, we've already seen it. I think we're going to see a lot more of it.
Interesting. And how do you think about that impact of AI into finance? Where are you seeing it happen today, and where do you think it's going to be? Like you mentioned, AGI not in even 10 years, but what do you think that's going to happen in 10 years? How is finance going to change from what it is today?
I think we're going to see 50% of the financial services firms in the world struggle to make money because they're so trapped in frictioned environments or kind of human scale centric environments. I can sit down with OpenBB and I can duplicate the analytic capabilities of 50 people at JP Morgan, or I shouldn't say JP Morgan, but let's say any firm, right? I don't want to name anyone. 2 years ago, that was impossible. You had to be an expert. You had to have access to, you had to pay all this money for all this technology, all the data feeds, all this kind of stuff. I can, using the SDK of OpenBB, I can download OpenBB, I can build a thesis, I can run it, I can test it, I can back test it in hours, right? And then using the SDK, I can hand my thesis to a grad student of mine, and they can write an operational product. And I can go from zero to a launched financial services product that I could then sell in the market. I don't know, 2 days, 3 days, maybe 4, call it a week if I, wanted to, be lazy on Friday, right? And so I think we're going to see a radical evolution in financial services, even in highly regulated markets like market systems and banks, because we're going to very easily, using artificial intelligence, be able to do 2 things that we can't historically do. Number 1 is radically automate the back offices. I mean, radically automate. Take 500 people and do it with 5, right? That's the level of automation we're talking about. 99% removal of human activity. The second thing is we're going to start being able to remove critical thinking processes from the front offices of these institutions. So whether it's deposit generation for banks, whether it's alpha generation for hedge funds, the ability to find the needle in the haystack that you would make a decision on, whether it's to capture a deposit, generate a loan, pick an investment thesis, the AIs can try every possible combination, back test all of them, and come back to you in minutes, right? And because we don't rely on public cloud GPUs or huge private GPU infrastructures, I can do a lot of this on my laptop, which is going to make me a mugging target next time I'm in New York. I'm sure somebody's going to try to grab me just to grab my laptop. Well, don't worry, it's not the laptop I carry around when I'm in New York. But the ability to do all of that on fundamentally a $3,000 laptop is now at your fingertips. The only reason I need internet is because there might be data that I have to call through an SDK or connect to OpenBB to get. And guess what? I can test this. I can have a bunch of grad students testing. I can run around. I can build better risk models. one of the ways we tested our platform was to actually build a risk modeling infrastructure that mimics what the federal banking regulators use, because obviously I lived in that world. And in just a couple of weeks, using a bunch of technologies, sadly OpenBB wasn't part of it at that early stage, but I was able to duplicate risk modeling and built a risk model that predicted all but one of the bank failures that have occurred in the last 12 months, and it's predicted almost every single required M&A. It's interesting. The one bank failure it didn't predict was Signature Bank, which obviously there's a lot of question marks about why that one was forced to fail. Some questions on the political side, but very long answer to your question. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I'm thinking about it because we got caught a bit on the old SVB bank, and now PTSD.
Without stepping on anybody's toes, almost every single bank failure that occurred in the last 12 months, we knew was coming just because of the rate change, right? And we knew was coming because of venture debt. And we knew what was coming because of other economic features. The problem is nobody was thinking about second and third order impacts of so many of these activities. That's why I think so many technologies today and so many of the younger companies today are far better positioned than their legacy older cousins out there. And the OpenBB and Frontier Foundry are two examples of this, where the ability for us to see the second and third order impacts is inherent in what we're doing, right? It's almost impossible for me to go in and do an analysis using OpenBB where I don't see at least the tendrils of what those other impacts are going to be. And it makes me a better analyst, and it makes my customers fundamentally in a less risky environment than the ones that came before.
It's very interesting. And yeah, I mean, now that we're started talking about Frontier and OpenBB, how did you hear about OpenBB? When did you start incorporating OpenBB on your workflow? How did that relationship advance? Because we only started chatting a few months ago, but you already knew OpenBB when we started talking.
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate that the head of open source at GSIB actually texted me. He's like, "Hey, have you ever heard of this thing?" And I'm like, "No, I've never heard of it." And this was last year, I think. And so I go and I'm looking at it. I'm like, wait a minute. This is exactly what I need. It's already all there. I was needing something, I needed the equivalent of a digital whiteboard for me to scribble stuff on, right? And that's what I used it for. And then I was playing around with a preview of ChatGPT 4 before it was widely available, and I started using something called AutoGPT. And then David glued the two of them together, OpenBB and AutoGPT. And I'd been literally, when I saw that he did that, which I think I discovered through your Twitter stream actually, I was in the middle of doing that myself. I'm like, well, great. Delete that folder that was a bunch of crap. I downloaded his and just immediately started using it. And what was interesting is, I will tell you, and I will give you all the credit in the world for this, because I discovered structural limitations in the large model environments because of the questions that my soon-to-be customers were asking me that I was trying to test using OpenAI, and I couldn't get the right answers because of how they train those models. And that's what made me realize we had to go down a different path in terms of the ensemble AI model that we've currently used. And so I think, you and the team deserve all the credit for keeping me from going down that path. What it has done, though, is also open up a bunch of doors, because most enterprise customers can't use those big public model environments, right?
Sure.
And, they don't want to spend $30 million or $40 million or whatever it is to run in essence, a sandbox test case. They need something more manageable, faster, something where you can run it, at the scale of a laptop or a small prototype. But then turn around and actually have something meaningful out of it that you can then move to production that fits inside of the regulated environments that they operate in. Now, it doesn't matter if you're talking about financial services or the US government. Those are two huge markets where, and healthcare is a third market where so much of the generative AI that's out there, you just can't use because of how the data is managed.
Yep. Even ChatGPT, I spoke with some of these investment banks, and they are not allowed to bring ChatGPT in-house. which is wild, given like the boost in productivity that everyone all around the world has gotten from the impact of ChatGPT.
It's if they had made 3 or 4 different technical decisions earlier on in their development process, they would not have this fundamental limitation in their growth model. But I think, fundamentally, OpenAI is trying to replace Google. They're not trying to replace IBM, SAP, Bloomberg, all these other things. And that's why this kind of one big model issue is going to be a challenge. If you're trying to replace a search engine that is unregulated, open, scale, fundamentally trained against all of the internet, great. They're going to do just fine. We're all going to be talking to computers and the searches will go out there. But for anything where you care about data privacy, anything where you care about intellectual property, anything where you care about your competitors hearing about what you're doing or learning what you're doing, or just you don't like the idea of a third-party corporate entity, whether it's an American company or any other kind, kind of having all this data about you, you're in a different spot, and that leaves a lot of space for the rest of us.
That makes sense. And since you're here then about OpenBB, like what were you using before? Were you doing everything like standardization, aggregation, all like manually, and then basically you just swooped in and used our API and that was it?
Yeah, literally we had a list of 140 different data sources, and I had guys literally going through each one of them, grabbing them manually, normalizing them, and all of it. Yeah, I mean, it's what everybody was doing before you came around, right? And this is why I keep this. We'll get to my wishes for OpenBB in a second, but it was all entirely manual, and in 1 week we threw all of that out. We threw every single bit of that out, and right now we're just taking snapshots where we have specific questions. OpenBB lives in 2 places in our life cycle. Number one is it's what all of us use when we're thinking about, okay, we want to see a ripple, we want to see an analysis, we want to do something. It is what I go to. It's on every computer I own. It is why I now make sure that I always have a hotspot with me or the equivalent, right? I was sitting actually on the Acela between New York and DC the other day, and was using it to do an analysis, and I didn't have my privacy screen on my laptop, which bad on me. But the guy sitting next to me was like, "What are you using?" And I was explaining it to him, and he was retired, but he used to have a Bloomberg terminal 10, 15 years ago, and I was explaining what it was, and I was playing around with some of the more interesting analytics, and he was like, "My God, I would have killed to have this 10 years ago." So that's number one. It's my personal scratch pad. So that's number one. And my analysts, all my PhD scratch pads. The second thing is, it is becoming a source of record for us for a bunch of the data sources that you guys have just already managed. And it just makes my life easier to not have to spend energy building and managing that. So those are the 2 places.
Nice. And you mentioned what are the requests, like, the future, like what would you like OpenBB to do, more or less?
I actually think it's almost time to split OpenBB into 2 different products, maybe 3. Okay. And you and I've kind of talked about this previously. But this is a more refined thought than the rambling I gave you a few weeks ago. So number one is, it is an absolutely amazing source of record data platform. I would love it if I could just have a container I could download that is OpenBB, and I could just hit it with an API, right? And if I could configure it in such a way where there are certain data sets, certain types of data, certain timelines of data, that it would just sit there and it could have terabytes or more of data, and it would just grab it, automatically manage it, nice little data lake kind of environment. Like, that's, I think, product A. Product B is the middleware. All the interesting analytics, the generative AI, like all the thinking, all the analytics, all the math, right? That's a second product. And then the third is the UX. And, being open source, I would love it if I could, plug into the UX, plug into the middleware, plug into the data. I think you could create an entire ecosystem of companies that use you guys as a backbone. Yeah. If you kind of broke it up into those three buckets, and that's how I would approach it. But I'm not you, so I as one of your champions, I would just say, I think you could create a couple $1 billion worth of business by creating that opportunity.
Yeah, I think we're going into that direction in terms of like creating something that is more like scalable and modular, we're starting at the data side because we realized that actually most of the users were using us for the data access. And quite a few, they didn't even use any of the toolkits. They didn't use econometrics, forecasting, they were just there for using access to the data. But when you installed the platform, everything came attached to it. And so you were basically getting like delayed. And sometimes there were issues at the install level because of extensions that you're not even using, right? And then let's say that you want to add a new data provider, right? You need to go onto all of these loops to add it onto the terminal. Or if you want to create a new like toolkit that is like your own like, factor model, you need to go through all these like loops again. So what we are working on this new platform that we did a preview event like last month is basically having something that is really modular and scalable. And so we use these poetry endpoints that allow you to, you install the core of the platform, what we call it. It takes like 20 seconds. And that's the core. But what happens is with the same command, let's say that you have a new data provider, but it's the same command. It's from, for instance, like analyst estimate, right? And you just have data from a different data vendor that you trust more. So we allow the data vendors to incorporate that and create their own extension. So that their extension could be called OpenBB-vendor1. And basically when you do pip install OpenBB-vendor1, it will recognize what commands these data provider will impact, and it will update that core model accordingly. And so that means that then you can scale on top like really easily because you just add what you need. And that's the data level. Then we will allow like organizations to build extensions. Because what we realize is as well is that like companies, and I'm assuming that you are in this bucket, like you can play around with like the analytics and the toolkit that we allow, but ultimately you want to do your own thing. And so we want to allow you to create your own extension that then can be used within your organization. And so that you can share with others and say, okay, install these and you'll get to the same stage as where I am. And this was not possible before. You had to include it into the open source project, which is then like gets more bloated and more bloated, and so, yeah.
And not only that, if it's a private company doing it, and even if they have a degree of maturity about how they think about open source licensing and things like that, it's far easier to pull an open source project into an enterprise, especially in a risk intolerant environment, than it is to go off and contribute to an open source project, right? Or build outwardly, right? And so I think both in the example I gave as well as the example the path that you're talking about, there's an opportunity for regulated environments where it's financial services, healthcare, government, whatever, to use these technologies in a very straightforward way, in a way that is far more risk tolerant relative to where they sit today. I can tell you, having been, in private sector many years as well as in the government, pulling an open source project into work on something is incredibly easy. I can just do it most of the time, right? If I were to have to go to my leadership and say, well, in order for us to use this tool, I've got to have, a GitHub, I've got to, have some sort of a relationship outbound, 90% of the time that will get killed, just from a risk perspective, or you'll have to get an ATO. And right now, given how slow the various pieces of the government are, getting an ATO is anywhere from 9 to 18 months. Well, you and I could take either of our companies and go from zero to, couple $100 million in valuation in 9 months. So, you can't really wait that long anymore.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And it's interesting that you have that insight, because I spoke with people in the industry, in particular, like more like finance directors, people that don't know much about open source. And some for some reason, they always associate like open source with like cheap and lower quality and security.
Yeah.
And it's actually the complete opposite. Like if projects start at literally the same time and one is open source and the other is closed source, like the open source will always be better because of the eyeballs, the progress. You're building in public, you have more liability, more people to control, to view the code and iterate. And it's just so much better overall. But there's this like concept that I feel like it's been changing now, and also because of like the AI hype around open source, where like open source is actually catching up on closed source. Like open source has like never had this much eyeballs, in my opinion. But it is interesting that from the government perspective, like they know they understand open source, and they understand that it's much easier to work with open source than private projects.
Well, I mean, it's something I think a lot of people don't realize is the internet wouldn't work. You and I would not be able to be having the conversation we are having right now on two different sides of the planet if it wasn't for open source. And, I grew up in the open source world of the 1990s, everything from, ANSI C to GNU AutoConf to, the open standards, the creation of W3C. Like I grew up in all of this. And I have to tell you, people who don't think open source matters to every human being on the planet multiple times a minute right now do not fundamentally understand how the internet works. And so I get to get on a soapbox about this because I have a lot of people, especially, lawyers in government or bureaucrats or mid-level managers who think they're going to be CIO of a Fortune 50 company one day, all kind of poo-poo all of this. And they just fundamentally don't understand how these technologies work. And so to me, I think it's open source finally getting the recognition that it deserves and as the global phenomenon that it has been for 30 years. So that's my, open source to rule them all.
I agree. No, I mean, I'm biased, but I think one of the things is that if OpenBB were to not work out, which I don't see that possibility, but if there's a slim chance, I think it would be really sad for the financial industry because no one else is trying to do what we are at the level that we are, bringing open source and this level of transparency to financial world, which is one of probably the closest industry that everyone is trying to compete. And then the thing is, I talk with all these firms and they all do the things in the same way, yet they keep on reinventing the wheel. And I don't understand why. I don't understand why would you do that? Why don't you just start from something that someone else has built on and start? You can have your edge built on at the edges. You don't need to reinvent always the same tooling over and over again. And then it's everyone has the same problem. The data standardization and aggregation. Everyone has that same problem. And for instance, everyone has Bloomberg, Refinitiv, CapIQ. But then the issue is that they have this platform, right? But you can't call one of these companies and ask them to add more data, right? And if you want you have to assume that everyone else also has these tools, right? So what ends up happening is that all of these firms end up buying data from external data providers. But then, that data doesn't work well with integrating with the investment research platform that they are already using. So they need to build something custom and they start from scratch. And so they start integrating data and they start standardizing it. And then they start thinking about how to visualize it. And some go and build something on their own C, C++, which takes a lot of time and millions. Others use Streamlit. But at the core, at the essence, all of this pipeline is being reinvented over and over and over again.
Well, this is why I think we're at a bit of a watershed moment, because if I had just the data ingestion, normalization, aggregation, and kind of availability infrastructure of OpenBB, where I could just add proprietary data to it, or trading data I'm getting from some of my customers, because we have a bunch of customers in capital markets, I guarantee you it would streamline and make my life easier. Because right now I have data coming in. I have you guys kind of as one bucket of data, right? Then I have 140 other data sets that are all proprietary that we're working with, right? And some of that's the standard stuff that everybody buys. Some of it's stuff that people haven't thought of just yet. Some of it's my customer data. But I have to take the data out of OpenBB and put it into something else just so it all lives in kind of one logical place. And man, it would be unbelievably useful if I didn't have to do that, or pick your data vendor that everybody buys from. If I could literally just flip a switch and copy paste a 74-digit license number into an OpenBB config, and it would know to go to a certain place, use that license, knows how that license should operate, and then that data just emerges as something that's available inside of the runtime environment of OpenBB. Wow. Yeah. I mean, you would wipe out the need for a third of enterprise IT at a lot of these companies, right?
That's kind of, our ultimate goal is to, aggregate all of the data and create a standard. Because at the end of the day, I think one thing that we did really well is that we never claim that you are using OpenBB data. You will always know where the data comes from. And from your perspective, we talked about the standardization and aggregation, but think about a data vendor today perspective, right? Let's say that you find the best data, and the best data could be, you scrapping something from a newspaper and writing it onto an Excel spreadsheet, right? Let's say that now you want to monetize this. What you have to do is insane, because you need to create an entire team for it, because you need to create marketing, you need to create sales to talk with people, you need to create a product, because otherwise how people can visualize this? So you need to hire engineers. But what if you just add to focus on the tech side to bring the data to OpenBB, and that's it? because we already have the users on the other side. They just know, okay, there's this new data source available and you can add it, and some of it is free, but maybe they have like a tier that, you know, is paid. And if you want, like, you know, I don't know, if you want to see this data only on the past 2 years, it's free. If you want to see on further than that, then you pay, you know. Then it just works, because, like, you know, we are basically the infrastructure. They can connect, and as this like positive environment that like is a win-win-win, really, if you think about it. So that's, you know, that's a bit of where we're trying to go. But yeah, I'm curious about, like, okay, what like, you know, you're just like super successful, like you go to like media all the time, like, you know, what motivates you on a day-to-day to, you know, to keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in terms of like finance and technology?
I'm not good if I'm bored. So, no, we have so much work to do. We've spent the better part of 60 years creating a bunch of friction and a bunch of legacy and a bunch of, you know, fundamentally things that barely work. A lot of duct tape, a lot of baling wire. And I think about the next century of the maturation of our civilization. I think about the evolution of the workforce. I look at the evolution of our education system. I look at the swings in things like global reserve currency and political parties. And we are not graduating enough people with the right skill sets to do a lot of these things manually anymore. That fundamentally, we have a radical disconnect globally, not just here in the United States, although it's, I think, especially acute in the United States, that we are not graduating enough people with the right skill set. And we have a lot of policies designed to support last generation's workforce, you know, people who work in factories and things like that. You know, the CHIPS Act is fundamentally, I think, reasonable. It took too long. It's kind of incentivizing in the wrong way, and it's not fundamentally creating future innovation. And so I think in order for liberal democracies, capitalism to be a compelling worldview 100 years from now, we actually have to invest in them. And the easiest way to do that is to make them more successful, more innovative, and to show that it actually has value. And right now, that's a tough sell, I think, for a lot of people. I think there are a lot of people out there who rightly are disillusioned. You know, they think there are other more interesting things to do with their lives. And this is the most interesting thing in the world to me. And I'm happy to continue to do this. I am incredibly fortunate with the success I've had in my life. You know, the ability for us to build this company without raising venture, the ability for us to have the kind of revenue we have without a sales force. I mean, it's kind of a dream to be able to do that. And we've all had our terrible stories of VC, which is, you know, worth another conversation, you know, worth cocktails or something. But what motivates me is I get to work with amazing human beings. Every single person I work with, I adore. They're wonderful people. They're great people. They're people you want to hang out there. They're people you want to champion and make them successful, like you. And it's incredibly easy for me to get up every morning and push myself, because I think it's the right thing to do for our civilization. It's the right thing to do for the people I work with. So that's I
love that answer. No, thank you so much for your time. Is there any like closing remark, any, you know, call to action? Like if someone wants to learn more about you, where should they go? LinkedIn,
I am
Twitter?
literally, well, thanks for that. I mean, I'm literally the only person in the world with my name, so it's really hard to hide on the internet. So if you can spell my name right, you'll find me. But you know, you can email me. Yeah, you find me on all the social medias, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff. I think, you know, if you're listening to this and you're in capital markets and you're a user of OpenBB and you're looking for, you know, other people of a similar mind, of a similar way of thinking about the world, and you want to have the most advanced artificial intelligence in your business, you should be calling us, like all your competitors already are.
What type of business do you want to specify?
I mean, most of our business, most of our customers are hedge funds, you know, mostly in you know, major financial centers. And they are, you know, these are companies that are looking at what their competitors have been doing for a decade and spending hundreds of millions of dollars doing, that they're able to get the same, if not better, for, you know, a significantly smaller investment. That's fundamentally what it is. That's, you know, that's who our customers are, and that's who I'm looking to engage with and champion. I would say anybody who's listening to this, if you're already using OpenBB, you're already ahead of the curve. And so, you know, if you need any support in that, then you should also reach out, because if you're using OpenBB, you're probably already positioned for success.
I love that. Thank you so much, Sultan. It was a pleasure to have you, and yeah, I look forward to our collaboration, see what we can build together.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye.